So you want to be put on notice? I'll give you notice. Today, there's a Macguffin notice going on in this episode. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, today, I'm really excited to have with me for the Q&A writer and director Rawson Marshall Thurber. And he was very generous with his time. And yes, we discuss MacGuffins. Like, the conversation got as geeky as I wanted it to. So we do talk about MacGuffins and their use in Red Notice, his film. And it was a good chat. There was a lot of interesting things brought up about his creative process and what it took to get this film made, especially during the pandemic. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, this podcast episode is sponsored by Coverfly.com. If you're a screenwriter who's looking to get your work out there, you'll love Coverfly because they curate the best screenwriting, talent discovery programs all in one place. At Coverfly.com, you could submit your script to writing fellowships, labs, competitions, and festivals, and you could track the status of your submission through the Coverfly Writer Dashboard. Also, they're an incredible resource for connecting writers and industry professionals. Already, hundreds of writers have found their agents and managers through Coverfly.com and have gone on to work with companies like Universal, Netflix, CBS, Amazon, and Blumhouse. So if you're an emerging writer with a finished screenplay, be sure to check out Coverfly.com and see what resources work for you. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We are literally weeks away from publishing our new issue. It has a Dune cover. We have so much great stuff in this issue, so I really am counting on your support to become a subscriber. And I want to make the deal good for you. If you want to subscribe now, you could save $5 off by using the discount coupon code SAVE5 over at backstory.net, and they will save you $5 off a one-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. If you've never read us before, you could check out our free issue over at backstory.net or through our iPad app Backstory. Read the entire issue, see what you think, and if you like it, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber because your subscription matters now more than ever, so thanks for your support. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into my Q&A with writer-director Rawson Marshall Thurber about his latest film, Red Notice. Okay, Rawson, it's good to see you. How you doing?
Great. Nice to see you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. I really enjoyed this film, but I'm going to go way, way back for a second.
Okay.
I started my screening series in 2003. And in 2004, we did a screening of Dodgeball together at the Harmony Gold Theater.
Oh, that's right.
Right
that's
as it was coming out. And it was an absolute blast. The studio knew that they had something good, but they wanted to get it in front of a crowd. And it was 1 year before I started podcasting, because basically 2005 was when the podcasting craze kind of hit.
Yeah.
And somewhere there's a tape of that interview, and I'm going to dig it out. But I think the way to start into this is all these years later, because that was such a big deal for your career early on. I'm curious, what, if anything, could you trace back as a lesson of Dodgeball, a creative lesson that you learned making it, that stayed with you as you went on in your career to other comedies?
Well, on Dodgeball, it was my first film. And, when you're making your first film, the learning curve is so steep. If you've never made a movie, you just don't know. You can't know what it's like. I suppose it's like giving birth. Like you could talk about it and describe it and read all the books you want. But if you've never done it, then you don't know. But once you've done it one time, then you really know what it is, and you're sort of in the club. So for me, I think, when I look back on Dodgeball, I wince at how green I was, and I think part of what I learned, I think, on Dodgeball was, the power of focusing simply on the story. Because when I made Dodgeball, I like I said, I was so green. I didn't have experience. When you make your first film, you don't have edict on your side. You can't say, trust me, I've done this before, and here's how it goes. But I had written the script, and I'd rewritten the script, and I knew that story backwards and forwards, and I knew those characters, and I knew why something was funny, and I knew if you changed this, how it would affect something 3 scenes down the road. So one thing that I've taken with me from Dodgeball is is an appreciation of story and to trust the story that you've worked on. So all the way here to Red Notice, which I also, it's another original idea, and I wrote it myself, all by myself, and staying focused on the small things, on the story itself, and the simple story you're trying to tell. And I think that's something I took from Dodgeball all the way to Red Notice.
That's awesome. Well, obviously this is now, I believe, your third film that you've worked with Dwayne Johnson, and you really have a knack for his voice. Central Intelligence and Skyscraper being the previous two. What do you think is the key to working with him that you've noticed? I'm sure you guys probably have shorthand now. So
no, 3 movies in a row with Dwayne. We've known each other for, the better part of a decade. We've become friends outside of work. Our families are friends. Our kids go to the same school. We spend time together outside of making movies. I know him as a father and a husband, and so there is that shorthand that we have. And I guess why I like working with him, and you'd have to ask him why he likes working with me. I couldn't tell you, but I know why I like working with him, and I think it's because we like the same kind of movies, and we like to deliver the same kind of thing to an audience. We both like movies that entertain, and that thrill that make you want to smile at the end. And that's, I think, what Red Notice is. I mean, it's a movie for people who love movies, and Dwayne and I both feel like the world is hard enough, and if we can lighten somebody's load for 2 hours and make them laugh, make them clap, and maybe give them a thriller or a chill, then our job is done. And that's what
we'll get to today's movie in a second. But
sure.
Obviously he trusts you because there's so many self-deprecating jokes, especially in this movie, that he has a good sense of humor about himself. He really was allowing Ryan Reynolds to get under his skin in the movie, which was always funny. But I just want to talk about your transformation, though, from you made an independent film, and then when you're doing these first 2 films with him, you were transforming yourself into an action comedy director. So suddenly you're dealing with expensive stunts, special effects, and it must have been a trial by fire for you. Tell us some of the things that kept you sane and got you through that process, because it is, in video game terms, right, leveling up, certainly, and couldn't have been easy.
Well, no, I mean, none of it's easy. But I think in terms, like, I've always loved action films. I especially love action adventure, and I love a good swashbuckler. And I started in straight comedy. I mean, Dodgeball has sports in it, so I guess it's some sort of level of action. But as I progressed from that to We're the Millers, which has a little bit of action, to Central Intelligence, which is probably a pretty down the middle action comedy in terms of its balancing act. And then Skyscraper was a straight action film. And I certainly couldn't have made Red Notice if I hadn't made Skyscraper, and if I hadn't made Central Intelligence. And they all sort of built on each other, and I sort of inched forward toward Red Notice. And I guess when you deal with action, you have so much support, Jeff. There's a stunt coordinator, there's a visual effects supervisor, there's special effects. You storyboard it, you pre-visit, you have endless meetings about whatever the sequence is. Not only because you want to execute the story, but you need to keep people safe, and that takes a lot of planning. But what's interesting about action to me, it's a lot of fun, first of all, but also. When you're planning to blow up a car and you call action, the car either blows up or it doesn't. You don't go, hey, could that blow up funnier? So when you're dealing with comedy, like in a straight comedy scene, that I actually find that more stressful than a big action sequence, because that's just me. That's me and that actor or actors, and trying to figure out, like, is this funny? Is this working? If it's not working, what do we do? What if we try this? What if we try that? And so I find myself, my mind, the RPMs in my storytelling brain are redlining much more in a comedy scene than they are in an action scene, which is which in some sense is I know this sounds weird, but a little more relaxing,
No, it makes sense because obviously you have a bunch of experts at hand, but when you're doing comedy, the joke's either landing or it isn't. And if it isn't, you have to kind of retool it immediately.
That's exactly right.
And I want to get into your creative habits for a second, just and talk more about your writing, but actually, because we're on action, how does your action look on the page? You know, there's an old adage that sometimes if you have really blocky, thick paragraphs, that it's too much for executives to read, right? But you need your crew heads to understand what you're doing. So sometimes people haiku it, you know, a couple sentences at a time, then white space, then more. Sometimes when it's somebody like yourself, who's a writer director, you know, some of the things already that you don't need to put on the page. Tell us how your action looks on the page and if that's evolved from these 3 movies.
What a great question. And what a specific and smart question. And yeah, I've, you know, I think my writing has improved, and I think my directing has improved as I've learned, you know, as I've gotten better, as I've made mistakes and found out what's worked for me. Certainly when you're writing, a screenplay and you're writing action, you don't want to kill the reader. You know, if they get to a page that is all description, all narration, right? All descriptive lines, that can be daunting. And so keeping that flow on the page is more important than I think some people think. When I write an action sequence, I start by sort of playing the sequence on the movie screen inside of my forehead, right? I imagine what it will look like. I imagine how do I want to cut it. And then I try to write that down in as few words as possible. And what I mean by that is you need to communicate the tone and feeling of the sequence. You want to be evocative so that you're painting a picture for people, but you don't want to get into punch for punch, beat for beat, gunshot for gunshot, because that will tire people out. And it's also not important. What's important is, what does this sequence feel like? Right? What is the tone of this sequence? And then making sure that if there are key story points that have to happen, right? Your hero gets knocked out, the bad guy gets caught, the glass breaks, the gun goes off, the tire, you know, explodes, etc. You want to make sure that those are very clear if you're, you know, in terms of the plot points of the sequence, where it starts and where it finishes. So I try to find a blend of detail and tone that is palatable and certainly, like you said at the top, has enough white space in it so that nobody gets scared off from reading it.
Do you sometimes use placeholder?
How do you mean, like TBD chase here?
Yeah, well, yeah, or like, you know, they're rushing through, you know, they're fighting with a spear and, you know, like in the vault, you know, or something like that, and you're not saying like every single thing that happens a moment at a time, you know, with the spear.
Well, I would never. I have too much pride as a writer to say TBD chase sequence here or something like that. Right. I would rather die. So no, but you're exactly right that you know, when I wrote the fight in Red Notice, which we can talk about later, you know, I didn't write that Gal Gadot picks up a spear or that Dwayne grabs a shield or any of that. What I wrote was, you know, it's a you know, something like it's a 3-way, no holds barred fisticuffs where they use every single piece of every weapon they can get their hands on. Right. And then you're setting the premise of the sequence, right? Here's kind of the headline of what this thing is. And then you get through key critical beats as we go. And then what's great about it, which a lot of people don't know, is when you write that, then you have a stunt coordinator and a stunt team, and you talk with that person, right? You say, look, this is kind of what I'm thinking. You watch other movies, you go, you know, I kind of like this vibe, not this. I want to get to this tone. And then they take that information and they bring you ideas, and they bring you, sometimes they'll even shoot a little, what they call fight viz. And they say, what about this? And you go, oh, I love this moment. I love that moment. So there's a moment in Red Notice where Dwayne and Ryan are sort of back to back with nightsticks pressed at their throats. And on 3, they knock them down and punch each of the guards and pivot and punch the other one. And it was a moment that I really loved. And I got to it by asking George Cottle, our fabulous stunt coordinator, who's a stunt coordinator on Spider-Man, and drove the Batmobile. You know, he's that guy. He's an amazing guy. Right. And I said, I want a Tango and Cash moment. I want our heroes to be working together and to punch these guys out in a cool way, Tango and Cash, right?
It all comes down to Tango and Cash. I kind of love it.
It always comes back to Tango and Cash, of course, right?
Yeah. And of course, you're also going to have storyboard artists that you're working with as well. And then once you get a sense of your set direction and what's going to happen on set, you could see the props and you'll know what's going to be there, whether it's shields, spears, stuff like that. You'll have that as part of, your set design. So I understand how fights keep filling out. So it's interesting to hear you say that. When you sit down to write, like right at the start, how important is outlining to your process? And what is your original design document like? Is it a Microsoft Word document that kind of beats things out? Or do you use, note cards? Tell us about it.
Oh, wow. I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying this conversation. I've been doing press for Red Notice for a day and a half. And this is one of the first times I've gotten to talk about the actual writing process.
Well, thanks, man. You're a great writer, so we want to hear all about it. We're going to get really geeky.
You're very, very kind.
I want to hear about your note cards, damn it.
So I'll tell you all about them. So broadly speaking, when you talk about, there are two types of writers, I suppose, screenwriters, that is, which is there are those who outline for 6 months. 40-page outline, 60-page outline, and then they write for 2 weeks. And that's how they get to their first draft. And there are other writers who start writing on day one, page one, and they write 180-page first draft, and then they figure out what they're doing and go from there. And I don't think either version is incorrect. I think it's whatever gets you writing and keeps you writing is the way to go. I fall sort of between the two. I definitely know where I'm starting and where I'm ending, and most of what happens in the middle. But I find that if I outline too much, if I spend too much time writing an outline, it steals the joy of the actual scripting process for me, which I really love, and it's still some discovery for me. So
I was going to say, like a lot of writers, they want to know their beginning, middle, and end generally. Yeah. And then sometimes they want to be able to drive on that path alone a little without everything meticulously boarded out. So I could see that as well.
Oh, for sure. Like for me, like I know I'm going from Los Angeles to New York, and I'm going to stop, in Houston, and then I'm going to hit Chicago, and then probably Charlottesville, and then I'll end up in New York. But along that path, there are lots of off ramps and things to explore and see. So I'm definitely somebody who there's nothing I love more. There's no sweeter moment of screenwriting than writing the first act of a first draft of anything. It is sheer joy because you've been thinking about it for so long, and there are no problems yet. Nobody said they can't afford it. Nobody said you can't get this location or that actor, and it's just gorgeous and so fun. And I really enjoy it. So for me, if I outlined too much, the function of screenwriting would become a function of typing, and I'm not a typist.
Well, so tell me this: how long was your outline? and how long did you spend on it before you just started typing into the first act?
Well, so for Red Notice,
yeah.
So Red Notice started as a pitch, so I had to work out the pitch itself, and so I had to have a pretty significant level of detail, especially because Red Notice is, it might come across as kind of light and fun, but it's got some tricky underpinning there, and so I learned how to tell the story in a room. So it was a campfire story essentially, and a performance, and so I had to have that nailed, and I had to know all the turns and all the beats. So, but also when you're pitching as opposed to writing, you also have to know what not to say. You also have to know how to skip over stuff that's either too detailed, too boring, wouldn't pitch well, or you don't know yet. And you're like, funny, yeah. And you go, oh gosh, I don't know how to fix this. So I'm just going to whistle past the graveyard, and I'm going to hand wave past this, and hopefully nobody catches you. So it's a bit of a balance there. So when I sat down to write Red Notice, I had pitched it so many times that I really, I had in my notebook, I have a little, notebook where I'd written it all out. And I think it was, I don't know, 24, 28 sort of handwritten, beautiful mind scribble pages,
Right.
Which I don't know what that would end up being typed to, probably 6 pages, if I'm guessing. But yeah, I knew it cold by the time I started. But then, like I said, it's a totally different animal, telling a campfire story, pitching something versus writing it. And as I was writing Red Notice, you get to these points where you're like, oh shit, how's that going to work? And so you do hit certain blocks or challenges, and you have to figure them out. But that's the fun part,
Yeah, but it's interesting because there's this double-edged sword to it, right? Because when you do a pitch, if somebody latches on to an element that you pitched out in the room, but that by the time you're writing your first draft, you've decided, I don't need that anymore. Yeah. And then they see the script, they're like, wait, where's that scene that I loved? And it has to keep evolving and growing. So what do you do about that when stuff like that happens?
That's such a great question. That's definitely tricky. Where if you pitch something that ends up not in the first draft, if it really is like a key moment or a key sequence or a scene, and it ends up not in your first draft, I always flag it before the read. I flag it with the producer. I flag it with the executive who's going to read it. I'll say, look, I know there was the sort of camel chase in the mid-act, but I think I found a better way of doing that. That's more efficient. So when you read it, there's no camel chase. So I hope that's okay. I can put it in after, but just didn't want to spook you. So I always flag it because you don't want people to be taken out of the read. But one thing that I did on Red Notice that I've never done before, and I haven't heard anybody who's done this, and I've never told anybody this, so you'll be the first, is when I started the pitch for Red Notice, I had so much expositional pipe to lay before I could tell the story that I sort of made a game of it in the pitch, where I would start talking and telling the story and laying all this expositional pipe. But I would say, okay, don't start your watches. The pitch hasn't started yet. But I would just sort of kind of vamp and tell them all this expositional stuff, so that when I said, okay, start your watches, I can start my pitch, I didn't have to deal with sort of the dry exposition, and I could just tell the story of the characters, and it seemed to work really, really well in the pitch. And then I went to write the movie. And I bumped up against this sort of expositional need that I sort of was able to gloss over in the pitch. And I was like, gosh, I really don't want to write this. Like, I really don't want to write this expositional garbage. How do I handle it? And so what I decided to do was create a 4-minute animated expositional dump, essentially, that would open my screenplay. So when I turned it,
just like the explanation in Jurassic Park, kind of, which is also animated, and here you're explaining Cleopatra's eggs. Essentially,
that's exactly right. But in the movie, so backing up, you're exactly right. The animated piece in Jurassic Park, in Dodgeball, I sort of do something like that. There's an instructional video that sort of explains the rules of Dodgeball. But in this, for this screenplay, so I created a little 3 or 4 minute animation piece. And when you got the script, it says Red Notice on the front. You turn the first page, and then it says, "Hi, please go to this link. Please click on this link. Here's the password. There's something there you'll need to see before you start reading." And then if you turn the page again, it says, "Seriously though, don't read this. Click this link. I'm not kidding." And then you would click the link. You would get to see this, really sort of fun expositional information, and then you can start reading the script. Are you going to
put that online anywhere?
We're thinking about it. Yeah, we're thinking about it.
We would be happy to run it and put it on our site. That sounds amazing.
Okay, let's talk about that.
That's a great way to get exposition out of the way, because
cool.
And the movie starts with that, which is a interesting way in. I guess it brings us to the most boring question I know you've been asked a million times. So you could rush through it. You do not have to dwell on this, but what gave you your initial idea for Red Notice and this concept of the heist of these 3 eggs?
Oh man.
You could give us the quick version.
The quick version is, I love I love heist movies, or I love an action adventure, especially. And we talked at the top about putting all those, together in a big red bow. But I think what I was trying to figure out a MacGuffin that had three parts to it, and I watch too much History Channel, as my wife would tell you. I mean, if there was a show called Bigfoot Aliens of Egypt, I would never stop watching that show. Right. So I'm a sucker for it. And in fact, the opening voiceover in Red Notice is done by Robert Clotsworthy, who is the voiceover artist who does all the voiceover for The Curse of Oak Island and Ancient Aliens on the History Channel.
That's awesome.
So at any rate, I love that sort of stuff. I love kind of World War II, Nazi conspiracy nonsense. And I love ancient Egypt. I was a classics major. So I sort of put all that stuff together, classics major or minor, excuse me, in college. So I put all that stuff together and kind of and made up my own thing. And it was really fun, Jeff, when I was pitching it, because I would talk about Cleopatra's eggs as though they were a real thing. And it was really interesting to see some people go, oh, yeah, sure. Cleopatra's eggs. Yeah. I remember I saw those were those at the British National Museum? I'm like, no, they're actually at the Tate. They go, oh, right. Yeah, the Tate, of course. And then at the end, you let them off the hook and you go, it's all bullshit. I made it all up.
Right. I looked it up. That's really funny that you did that too.
Yeah. Cool.
That's kind of hilarious. When you pitched it, how many pitches did you go through, or were the folks at Netflix the first folks to say, let's do this?
No, it was we pitched to 11 different potential buyers, and we got 11 offers. We ended up selling it to Universal in a highly competitive situation, and we actually set a record for the largest pitch sale in the history of Hollywood. It was thrilling, and then we were with Universal, and then I wrote 2 drafts for Universal, and then they didn't want to make it. They didn't want to make it. They thought it was too expensive it was not enough bang for the buck, and they were really nervous about it, just from the pricing standpoint. And Netflix absolutely jumped at the chance, and they pot committed, and they said, "Here, we love it. We want to do it. We believe in it completely." And I can't tell you how happy I am that we're at Netflix, and how lucky we are, especially considering what happened while we were shooting with the pandemic, and
what's happening. We'll get to that for sure. So, and it looks great. I mean, like, the film really has high production value. I guess if there's one thing that you could tell us about how to protect your property like that, it's a really sad thing that happens to writers, in which sometimes they get stuck in development hell, in which a studio gets cold feet and they cannot get it back. Now, the WGA has a requirement that I think 5 years after something sold or set up, that if you could buy out the studio for whatever money that they've put into it, so they don't lose money, you could get it out of development. Or I'm guessing in your case, you had some good relationships that said, it's not for us, but we're also not going to stop you from making it. Is that what happened? Is there any advice to give?
Yeah, Jeff, you're exactly right. I mean, Donna Langley, Jimmy Horowitz, Peter Kramer, everybody at Universal, and they were really generous about it. They just said, look, we're not going to do it, but we would never stand in your way. And they made it incredibly easy for us to move over to Netflix, and it's a real credit to them, because they didn't have to do that, of course.
Yeah, it's good that you got out so easy. Well, so okay, back to your creative habit for a second. No. When you sit down to write, how many hours a day do you like to write for, or do you have a specific page count that you try and hit each day?
There are 2 approaches, right? It's either hours in the seat or word count, page count, whatever you want to do. When I'm really going, I try to write for 4 hours a day. But it's not like 4 hours of fucking around. It's literally phone off, internet off, writing.
That's right.
4 hours is a lot. And at the end of a sincere 4 hours of writing, I'm pretty brain dead. But what I like to do is set a timer. This was not my idea. A friend of mine suggested it to me. I can't remember who. But essentially, I set an hour timer, and I write for an hour, and then I take a 10-minute break, get up, walk around, whatever, sit back down another hour. And I do that, essentially amounts to about 5 hours of time a day. And you'd be amazed at what you can get done when you're not, checking your email or flicking through your phone.
Do you keep stuff like that turned off? Because some writers actually turn off the Wi-Fi on their computer or their devices and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. There are certainly a couple apps that help. My phone's on airplane mode. Do not disturb. Sometimes you have to literally turn your Wi-Fi off and unplug the Ethernet, cable. Right. Anything you can do, right? Because
do you always write at the same time of day, or does that switch up?
Well, I have 3 little kids now, so I used to be a much more of a night owl, but now I'm up at 5 a.m. whether I want to be or not. So I find kind of mid-morning really, really good. So like 10 to 2, 10 to 3.
So the zone where everybody's off at school, your brain is awake.
Yeah.
You hit it before they come home and reinvade the house.
Yeah. But back to your question about development hell, like I don't think there's any good advice for any writer to get their work back. I mean, I think
progress to production deals are always good ones because it limits the amount of time someone could hold an option. So that's always always the go-to that I would say.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The one challenge that's there is when you try to get your project out, right? What studios can charge against it can be really, really onerous. Like
not only they don't just charge your fees, they charge the fees of their own executives that were overseeing it, right?
Yeah, they can charge overhead, and it makes it, yes, technically you could get it out, but then you're bringing it to somebody else and you're saying, look, you got to pay this plus a 15% big. And, it's not impossible, but boy, it's tough. And it's heartbreaking when something you care about deeply is just trapped.
There's a point on some comedies where they have roundtables. And there's been a lot of talk about that lately with the WGA doing the vote on, the additional writing credit, who gets credit for coming in on stuff like that. On comedies, is that something that you ever employ in which some comedians are hired for a day to kind of spitball ideas before it goes into production to just get those last kind of jokes in?
Oh, absolutely. In terms of roundtables, I've been a part of them, and I've benefited from them. I have a handful of really trusted comedian friends, writers, and typically, I'll send them the script and ask them to offer up any alts that they might have through the script, and pay them whatever the WGA allotment is, which is not enough, and then I usually try to send them something very nice.
That's cool.
And there's been so many times where you'll get, even if it's just one laugh from that, it's worth it. But sometimes you get 2 or 3, and on the day I'll have a list of alts in my pocket, and let's try this one, let's try that one, let's try the next one.
And of course, Ryan Reynolds always loves to improvise and is great for his own voice as well. So that was apparent here too, because there was some great lines that really worked well for him.
Yeah, I have an open door policy on improv on my sets, especially with comedy, especially with somebody like Ryan, like you said, Jeff, who's just gifted in that space. And I don't care if it's my joke or somebody else's joke. It's best idea wins, best laugh wins. I get all the credit at the end anyway. So, right. Let's go.
Exactly.
As it relates to, the ALM, issue at the WGA, I think it's a really tricky one. I think it's a really tricky one to navigate. I do think it's crazy that people who work on the movie, writers who write meaningfully on the film, aren't recognized. But it also it's a slippery slope, because I don't think, and I think most writers would say this, I don't think writers who participate in a roundtable and offer a half a dozen dick jokes should be in the credits. Like, I think that ain't right either. I was gonna say, most people who don't make movies, right? So they don't know how it works. And if they saw a list of 36 writers at the end of credits, it would dilute and delude the situation. So it's a really, it is tricky. But something has to be done.
But I think the WGA needs to retool their arbitration system.
Oh my God,
that's actually the bigger problem. But
for sure.
Skipping forward, just tell me this briefly: how far into production were you before the pandemic began, and then just any quick tips and trips for filming during the pandemic, and then we're going to get into the spoilers.
Well, we were about halfway through shooting, almost to the day. when the pandemic shut us down. And we were shut down for 6 months. And then we had to come back and make a movie during a pandemic. Nobody had done it before, certainly at this scale. And we were one of the first films back. And how do we keep everybody safe? And what are those practices and protocols and procedures? It was unprecedented. And thank goodness, like Netflix stepped up completely. They put safety first and backed it. And we never lost a single day due to a positive COVID test when we came back. And I think it's a real tribute also to the cast and crew of Red Notice, who they stepped up and they bucked up and they sort of embraced that old Hollywood adage of, the show must go on. So that was from a practical standpoint. From a creative standpoint, we had planned on going around the world and shooting this movie. And indeed, like right before we were shut down, a week before we were supposed to go to Italy to shoot a car chase. We had a whole car chase planned throughout Rome. I scouted it twice. We pre-visited it. It was all ready to go. And then the plug got pulled on it. And I had to figure out how to open this movie without a car chase because we couldn't leave Atlanta, Georgia. So then I wrote a foot chase through the museum. And I came up with the idea that Ryan's character would make a hard right and head into a section of the museum that was under repair. Right. So there's nobody there. So it's Ryan being chased by Dwayne and maybe a few guards. And so what was a car chase became a foot chase, became our opening scaffolding sequence, became a very short car chase when Dwayne gets into the Porsche finally. And I think actually the movie is better for it, frankly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it focuses on the triad of the three of them a little more too, I can tell, because it does keep overall them even in closed spaces sometimes. And I could see how maybe that was shot during the pandemic, even some of the stuff in the prison when they get there, I would assume, because, they're just in a cell together. You're right. Weirdly, we shot that before, but that would have been great. What was hard is like the stuff we had left. We had the big there's a masquerade ball in the middle. I was going to ask about that. Yeah, and we couldn't have that many people in the same room, so we shot. There's a moment where Dwayne and Gal dance, and they were in an empty ballroom dancing together, and then we had to shoot all the extras after as plates and put it all together. So it was like green screen. That makes sense. Essentially, a lot of visual effects and roto work, and it was incredibly challenging and also just incredibly expensive and so frustrating because it's like, if you're repairing your home and you've got to spend a ton of money just to fix the foundation, and you're never going to see the foundation, but you got to fix it anyways. And so that's kind of what happened with some of those sequences. When we started the film, there were only going to be 400 visual effect shots. And then after the pandemic, it was 1,400 visual effect shots. And of course, dancing becomes visual effects during a pandemic. So that's exactly. But you got through it because it looks seamless. I mean, one of the most beautiful sets you had, I think, was that lagoon. Oh wow! Right? Because that was a set, right? It was. But it looks gorgeous, doesn't it? Like, I actually paused it to see what it looked like because it really looks so good. And it seems like a pastiche of practical and visual. That's right. We built the lagoon, the tank and the set on stage. And we had just an incredible production designer. His name's Andy Nicholson, Academy Award nominee for Gravity. And he and his team and the construction team just worked wonders. And when you have a production designer like that, and my cinematographer, Marcus Forderer, who is a German wunderkind, and will be nominated and win many, many, many Academy Awards without me during his career. When you have two people like that working together, you're off to a great start. And we had Richard Hoover as our visual effects supervisor, and he won the Academy Award for Blade Runner 2049. Wow. And when you have three fantastic talents all working in harmony like that, you can pull off cinematic miracles. It looks beautiful, and the Russian bridge looks beautiful. I mean, like, the big budget that Universal maybe was scared of, Netflix really did put their money into it because it looked gorgeous. But okay, I want to jump into. Well, actually, before I jumped into the spoilers, do you want to tell us anything about the budget? Is there anything that you can say? I wouldn't want to say anything, but it's certainly the biggest budget I've ever had on anything I've made. Tell us the shoot range. How many days do you think it was, not counting the interruption of the pandemic? Yeah, it's a little tricky because of that, but I think it was about 90 main unit days and about 30 second unit days. Okay. I want to say so. It's not a crazy amount considering, but yeah, it was all spaced out and
we had, gosh, I think 7 different productions, iterations of the film, 7 seasons of Red Notice to make the film.
That's crazy. All right. Well, so we're going to jump into the spoilers.
Great.
Podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, if you have not yet seen Red Notice, press pause. Of course, our YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, you could press pause as well. Go see Red Notice. And then come back because we are going to dive into the spoilers. The funniest thing you said earlier, though, like it was the one joke that really cracked me up in the movie, and it only would crack up writing geeks, of course, in which they're looking in the art cachet for the third egg. And Ryan says something like, "Oh, it's probably in a box marked Macguffin." And you were talking about having, a Macguffin to write to. And there is something to be said to that. What could you tell us the lesson about having that Macguffin of the eggs? Because, the audience is still like, are they magical? Is anything going to happen? Or are they just going to be 3 eggs in a box at the wedding? And at the end, since they are a Macguffin, it doesn't entirely matter. So talk about writing with the Macguffin in mind.
Look, as everybody listening to your podcast, I'm sure is aware that, the Macguffin is a term of art invented by Alfred Hitchcock, who famously said, the Macguffin is the thing in the movie the characters care about, but the audience doesn't. So it's the Maltese Falcon, it's the Death Star plans, it's the thing people want, right? And that line that Ryan says is one of my favorites. That one I happen to write, but it's my favorite joke to hear play in an audience because it's a very specific joke and not a lot of people laugh at it. But the people who laugh at it really laugh at it.
Yeah, exactly. I was laughing quite hard.
There you go. So it's one of those 10% laughs, but it's just I love it.
I'm glad you kept it in. Tell us about a left turn. It's always interesting to hear about an idea that was stuck in your mind, something you were definitely going to do for 2 months, and then by the time you were filming, forgetting even the pandemic, you just never did it. Like an early interesting idea of the Red Notice that could have been, but definitely wasn't by the time, and why you cut it or went in a different direction.
Well, I had, you'll know why I cut it here after I say it. The way that Ryan and Dwayne escaped from the Russian prison was they got into a gondola, and the gondola was sort of a rickety gondola, and it was heading down the hillside as it was getting shot up and destroyed. And then they end at the bottom of the hill. They get on a snowmobile and they're chased by a bigger snowmobile with a flamethrower on it through a snowy forest, and it all ends in a big avalanche. That was too big for us, and so that could have been. So that was something that we cut early on, but I had it storyboarded. Thought it was super bitchin', and who knows, maybe we'll get to do it sometime.
Was there anything else that was more character story wise, like that was who's cutting who, or any elements like that?
No, there.
Changed?
One thing that actually was a really late cut that nobody really knows about is in the movie when you see Ryan and Gal and Dwayne each talk about their father and their history with their father. We went into an animated sequence, fully animated, that sort of told that story, and we heard them explain it in voiceover. And it was in the movie for a long, long time. So, Kill Bill does it, right? Sure. This was a different style of animation, but that same thing, right? And it was in the movie for a long time, and it was the only thing that was sort of polarizing, I think, to audiences as we were testing the movie. And some people really loved it, and for other people, it took them out of the film. And ultimately, it was a difficult call, but ultimately I decided to take it out because I felt like we didn't need it, and I actually really enjoyed Ryan's performance when he's talking about his dad, and I really enjoyed staying on his face. I thought it gave it a little more weight.
Yeah, right. Because I could see it being disconcerting. You're breaking kind of the reality of the movie.
Yeah.
Jump into animation, and you're right. The actors kind of did it. So
that's interesting. So that's a case where I took a big swing, and I'm like, I think this will be really cool, and it never quite got there, and it never quite felt it.
I think the lesson there is sometimes you just have to do it and see it, and then have the goodwill to cut it if it's not 100%. So because some people would hang on to it, right? Mm-hmm. And never admit that, maybe it's not working. So that's kind of interesting.
The mission of Red Notice is to entertain the maximum amount of people. And that doesn't mean that you hand over the reins to the audience and let them drive the ship. But if there is something that doesn't work for a significant portion of the audience, you need to take a hard look at it. And in this particular case, not only was it not working for a section of the audience, it wasn't working for me, and that was good enough.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you've never read us before, you could read our free issue in our iPad app or over at backstory.net. And once you get done with the free issue, you should know that you want to become a subscriber. We're one of the only magazines in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety. So if you want to subscribe, I'm going to sweeten the deal. You could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. And you could redeem that coupon over at backstory.net. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering. And of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out today's sponsor, Coverfly.com. If you're a screenwriter with a finished screenplay, you should check out the resources you could use at Coverfly to connect with industry professionals. Already, hundreds of screenwriters have found their agents and managers at Coverfly.com. And in fact, they have gone on to write for companies like Amazon, Netflix, Universal, CBS, and Blumhouse. So you could be next. If you're an emerging screenwriter with a finished screenplay, check out Coverfly.com to see what resources there can work for you. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with writer-director Rawson Marshall Thurber about his latest film, Red Notice. I liked the Russian escape. There were a lot of details there, and it's just kind of fun to hear like how some of those got into your mind, they're taking a shower and, Booth's talking about the quality of the soap and says how high the glycerin is. And, Fight Club fans have views on soap, of course. And so, it was interesting to see that as a callback later when he's using it and mixing it as an explosive. But then you're even doing the details of directorially showing his feet in the helicopter, turning on the pedals back and forth, which was cool as well. So
thanks.
Where do some of those ideas come through, and are they always in the script? Like, were those little moments with the feet in the script?
No, I wouldn't. Back to our action discussion, I would never write close up on the feet as he, presses
it wouldn't
pedal
make any
down.
sense.
But when you're there and you're looking at it, you see the shots, right? You see like, oh my gosh, like this would tell the story. This is a great cutting piece. And also when you deal with action sequences like that, you have previs. On a movie of this scale, you have sequences that are previs that you're involved with. You work hard with the previs team. We had a great team at Third Floor that helped us, and that those are invaluable tools as you put your story together. And sometimes those shots come from the previs department. They go, boom, they use that shot, and you go, oh my god, I never would have occurred to me, but that's such a great little piece. Let's try to get that.
It was a nice touch.
Oh, thanks.
It's fascinating though. One of the things about an action comedy sometimes is the villain, right? The antagonist, because they're either going to be a comedic factor, or if they're going to have a real world threat, it's not going to be a life threat, obviously. And here your antagonist was essentially, the Interpol agent, Inspector Das.
Yeah.
In which, the threat of jail is obviously going to be the threat for thieves. I'm curious about the challenges of writing that, because you didn't make her comedic. She's very serious. She's very focused. And at the same time, you're not going to give it too much screen time, because at the end of the day, it translates real fast.
Yeah.
The cop and robber dynamic.
That's a really smart observation. And the first time anybody's asked me about it. So I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah, in Red Notice, we're sort of on the side of the crooks. We're pulling for them. And Ritu Arya plays Inspector Das, and I think does a lovely job. And so you're exactly right, Jeff, that when you have 3 giant movie stars in your film, you don't want to leave them for too long, right? Like that's what you want to dance with who brung you, as they say. And so Inspector Das was definitely a chasing force, right? A force that kind of kept the heat on them. But didn't have really storytelling power of her own. We kept that with the three leads.
You definitely had a good Raiders vibe at a few places, and obviously it's Temple of Doom when they're in the art cache with the huge car chase down the tunnels, and it was really fun to see that. I'm kind of curious about how difficult it was for you to script that, because it's a very, very detailed chase with multiple cars in these tunnels. And, the only other thing that I would commend you on that was really interesting was the prop. You have this callback of Booth's character being kind of traumatized by his dad accusing him of stealing a watch that he didn't even steal. And then it comes back later in a flashback that he did eventually take the watch, and it was the watch actually that unlocks things for them when they get to the cache. So it was a nice through line on props, but
thanks.
Talk about that. And of course that amazing chase, which was very detailed.
Well, the watch, the story of the watch came first, and sort of how does someone who kind of is the son of a Swiss police captain turn to a life of high crime? And being a parent myself of three little ones, I've learned a lot about how important parents are and how influential they can be, and sometimes how damaging if they're not careful to their little ones. So I wanted to come up with a story that would have resonated with a young Booth and sort of sent him down a different path. And indeed, all the characters have daddy issues, I guess, and that's something that links them. But in writing that, I didn't think about the watch being the thing that unlocks the bunker until I think after my first or second draft. I was sitting around with some friends of mine who'd read the script, and we were talking about it, and I slapped my forehead, and I was like, oh my God, of course the watch has to unlock the bunker. And then you went back and threaded it through. So that's the story of the watch, but it was certainly fun to kind of come up with the doohickey itself and see how that all works. And I'm a sucker for that stuff. So I really enjoyed that. As it relates to the Mineshaft Chase, really complicated, probably the most complicated sequence we had. And we I wrote it, we storyboarded it, and then we prevised it. So we had a lot of prep on that. We also shot it practically. We went to a limestone mine about an hour and a half north of Atlanta, and we spent 2 weeks 400 feet underground in the dark shooting that sequence with all the stunt cars, wow, the entire crew, and we shot it practically. And it was so fun and really hard. And then we shot the actors on stage, and we blended both of those things together.
It works perfectly. I mean, I don't want this to take up too much time, but it's impossible not to note it. After the tragedy on the set of Rust recently, gunplay has been a big subject in films. And I'm curious what you could tell us about just kind of how safety was enforced on your set. I'm guessing there were prop guns with blanks that were used. And I'm kind of the school that if the proper safety is implemented, I think it's overall okay. But I also understand why some people definitely want to get way far away from it and just use special effects.
Sure.
It seems to me like the future is going to be a hybrid, because you're still going to occasionally have, as you said earlier, cars that explode that are real practical explosions and cars that explode that are special effects. I see this kind of going like that. But tell us about the gun safety things that you learned from CIA forward to this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what happened on the set of Rust was just a tragedy.
Horrible tragedy. And we still don't even know the full details.
Oh my God. A travesty, right? It just, and it should never have happened ever. I've made 6 movies, that, gunfire, and in almost all of them. And the armorers that I've worked with are incredibly careful. There are many, many, many numbers of safety processes and procedures to ensure that these sorts of things don't happen. And if you follow those, they never will, and they never do. And fortunately, injury from gunfire, serious injury, death even, is incredibly rare in movies. Incredibly. I mean, you're more likely eaten alive by a shark on set than you are to be injured through gunfire. That said, I do think we should look at our practices and procedures and only use live weapons with half rounds and quarter loads when absolutely necessary, and try to lean more on replicas and VFX to get you what you need if you don't need live gunfire. Now, there's a case to be made for live gunfire, exactly as you said. There's a different performance that you get when there's sound and light coming from the weapon, different reflection, different performance, and anybody who's ever done it will tell you that. But I think there's a balance, and there's a hybrid approach that's the right way to go. And I think we should look at our procedures and only using live weapons when you really need it, and when everybody's fine with doing it. Yeah, and there should be new procedures even to use live rounds. I think that they will probably write in new procedures that anytime a live round's used, that there's actually a few other steps now. I'm curious when you came up with the concept at the end of the movie that it's a long con, that the bishop and The Rock, the agent, they're a partner team. They're romantically involved. I knew it was one of the many possibilities. I also knew that it could have been a possibility for Booth, Ryan's character. Oh, wow. So I'm curious how many of those possibilities you played with, and if there's any other alternate endings you want to discuss. Well, it was from the very beginning. It was the kernel of the idea was that Hartley was playing a long con, and they were both the bishop. So that was from the very, very beginning. Right. And it's a great line in the script, by the way, saying that, remember, there's two bishops on a chessboard. I mean, that was a fantastic line. I appreciate you. Thanks for noticing. So it was always part of it. There were no other versions that I ever considered. But the fun of that is trying to figure out how to thread that needle, right? How to stitch it along so that the audience doesn't get wise. And when the reveal happens, that they don't feel cheated, that they feel delightfully surprised. And when they watch the film a second time, they go, "Ugh, it's right in front of me the whole time." Those are the ones that I like when you had a chance to figure it out if you could have. And part of the process, especially in the editing of the film, was I wanted to break it before I fixed it, meaning I put more in early cuts. I put way more in with Hartley and the bishop to see how far I could go, how much I could get away with before, 10 or 20% of the audience would go, it's Dwayne. And as soon as when I had that, then I would pare it back until almost nobody picks it out. And once I had that level, I felt like we were there, because you want it to be so close to that edge, but not over. So that when it happens, the audience realizes that you've been sort of playing it cards up the whole time, and they didn't see it. The most genius thing, I think one of the other funniest jokes of the movie, it wasn't just that you did one MacGuffin joke. It was that the whole plan is for them to sell these 3 eggs for $300 million, get it to the bride for her wedding in Egypt, right? And when you have the scene of the wedding, she doesn't even care when Ed Sheeran has a cameo and he's playing at her wedding. She gets all giddy and runs over to him. And I was dying because, again, you were reinforcing the fact that those eggs are just the MacGuffin, so unimportant. Yes, the thieves were after the money more than the eggs, of course, the payday. But when did that idea hit you, that the eggs were just going to be completely glossed over, no big deal, and that was going to be your ending? Because I actually really cracked up at that ending. Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. It's actually my favorite part in the whole movie. That was actually in the pitch. That was early days, and it was actually Ed Sheeran, and I would pitch it that here are the eggs, and then Cleopatra looks at the eggs and she goes, "Oh my God!" He goes running past the eggs, and there's Ed Sheeran coming along. And so it was in my little notebook that I talked about, my little 20 something pages of chicken scratch. And, but we couldn't get Ed. There was all sorts of problems and challenges with COVID. And a friend of mine introduced me to him, on email. And I sent Ed an email, and I actually sent him a picture of my notebook with his name in it. Well, that's cool. I said, I'd really love you to do this. And by the way, Ed Sheeran is the nicest person I've ever met, like the most gracious, kindest guy. And he said, that sounds great. I'd love to do it. And he said, the weirder, the better. And I said, you're my man. Right on.
That's awesome. I mean, it was a great moment. I know we're starting to run out of time.
Sure.
Just two really quick questions. One is, forgetting the pandemic for a second, it's always interesting to hear about a writer-director having to do a rewrite on set during production. Was there anything before the pandemic hit, which I know required a lot of rewrites, that you had to rewrite in the moment, on set, retool? Or was this kind of something that was so well planned with storyboards, previs, fight viz, and everything else that really you were just doing alt comedy jokes, and that was about the most of it?
I would say the vast majority was just lines, like one line here, one line there. Ryan, because Ryan has a dozen and a half different lines, and we would try them all and give it a go. The stuff that was always tricky. I think one of the ones where I actually had my laptop open and I was retyping a lot was the yacht scene at the end, which I know doesn't sound like it would be, but there was so much to tie up when all three of them are on the boat.
Sure.
And a way of sort of closing the loop, getting the band back together and getting out quickly. That was just a real bear. And on set, meter running, kind of going, well, God, what if we said this? What if we said that? And that was. I know it doesn't seem it in the film, but that was strangely one of the trickiest ones.
All right. Well, that's what I want to end on, though, is what was your toughest scene, both as a writer and a director? It doesn't have to be the same scene. And if it's one of the scenes that you had to redo because of the pandemic, it's fine to tell us about that. What was your toughest scene to crack on the page? And what was your toughest scene on set? And how did you creatively rise to the challenge?
Yeah. Well, I think the toughest scene, it might have been the reveal at the lagoon when Dwayne Hartley reveals himself to be working with the bishop, because the balance of trying to spring that trap, but not wanting to both overstay our welcome, but also bury Booth too much, because at that point, if I'd done my job right, people really liked Dwayne and Ryan together. And if Dwayne's character and Gal's character dance on the grave too much, you're going to not like them. And we want to get everybody back together feeling good. So that was really tricky to kind of spring the trap, make it fun, get all the exposition, all the sort of detail back in of like, here's how we did it, without overstaying our welcome, without spoiling the broth. So that was probably the trickiest writing side. From a directing standpoint, certainly 2 weeks, 400 feet underground in a mine shaft in Atlanta with cars that wouldn't start was the most challenging.
That sounds like it was pretty rough. Well, look, I thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Jeff.
I really enjoyed Red Notice, and of course, can't wait to see what you do next. Rawson, thanks for your time.
Thank you. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you, man. Take it easy.
Cheers.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Rawson Marshall Thurber for being so generous with his time and coming down and chatting about his latest film, Red Notice. And folks, I hope you'll check out our sponsors over at coverfly.com, because if you're an emerging screenwriter with a finished screenplay, they have a lot of resources that could help connect you to industry professionals. Already, tons of screenwriters have met their agents and managers over at coverfly.com, and you could be next. And those writers have already gone on to work for companies like Universal, Netflix, CBS, Amazon, and Blumhouse. So I hope you check out all the resources that are available to you over at coverfly.com. And while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. Of course, if you've never read us before, you could read our free issue and decide what you think of us. And if you like us, I hope you'll subscribe, and to sweeten the deal, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5 over at backstory.net, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You'll have access to our web viewer. You'll also have access in the iPad app as well with your same credentials. And look, it would be great of you to support independent film journalism during this time. And we have an amazing new issue coming out in just weeks. It's our Dune issue, and it's going to be packed. So I hope you take a look out for it and see what's inside of it when we make all the announcements. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page check out my passion project. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to reach me, I'm pretty easy. You could find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter and Backstory_mag on Twitter. You could also find me on Instagram under those same titles, Yo Goldsmith and Backstory_mag. I have a Facebook fan page. I check it sometimes. You could also write a letter anytime you want to backstoryletters@gmail.com. I promise not to read it immediately, but I will get to it. I swear I'll get to it. And there's just been a lot of letters lately, so I'm trying to go through them and respond to them all. But it's always nice to hear from people, so feel free to write in. Look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.